from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Partners, not rivals. The message from China's foreign minister as he visits Australia on a trip aimed at stabilising trade ties. China launches a new satellite to enable communications from the dark side of the moon. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Saudi Arabia in a new push for a Gaza ceasefire and the release of hostages. And thousands of people are evacuated from the Russia-Ukraine border region as bombs rain down on both sides. Partners and not rivals. That's how China's foreign minister says relations with Australia must be defined. Wang Yi is on his first official visit to the country in 7 years and has been meeting his Australian counterpart, Penny Wong, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Much of his trip is focused on stabilising trade relations after years of tension. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi began the day here in Canberra meeting with his Australian counterpart, Foreign Minister Penny Wong, for the China-Australia Foreign and Strategic Dialogue. Now, both ministers acknowledged the importance of stabilizing the relationship between the two countries and resolving trade issues. The pair also acknowledged the work they've been putting in so far. In fact, this was the 6th face-to-face meeting between the two since Australia's current government assumed office in 2022. They discussed the gradual removal of trade blockages and tariffs China had placed on several Australian export items in 2020. That was largely in retaliation to Australia's previous government calling for an international investigation into the origins of COVID-19. China's government has signaled that Australian wine appears to be the next item set to resume exports into China.
As the relations improved, both sides have been ready to properly resolve some issues with a more positive attitude. The latest progress is that the wine case has been properly addressed. By the end of this month, China will release the final decision.
I also welcome progress on trade between our countries, including on wine exports, and look forward to the resolution of outstanding issues. Predictability in business and trade is in all of our interests.
The two foreign ministers also talked about security issues across the region and internationally. Wang Yi later met with Australian business leaders who told him they're eager to resume greater access into the Chinese market. He also held brief meetings with Australian officials, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Now, Wang Yi ends his 2-day trip in Sydney on Thursday when he will meet with former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Canberra.
David Olsen is president of the Australia-China Business Council, which hosted a meeting between Wang Yi and Australian business leaders. He spoke to CGTN immediately after those talks.
Wang Yi did provide us with a very comprehensive overview of the developments taking place in China at the moment. He spoke about economic growth potential. He spoke about a number of the very strong policy that are being put in place, about the fact that China continues to welcome foreign investment. He spoke extensively about China's decarbonisation strategies, its move to a low economy, green economy, and what the implications for that might be. So all of these put together gave us further insights into where China's economy was going. Well, we've had a period of about 4 or 5 years where the relations have been strained. There have been a number of trade barriers implemented by China, particularly in relation to new tariffs that have been implemented on a number of our goods, very, very exceptionally high tariffs. The voice of business has been very important in bringing the governments together. We've provided the information that's necessary to enable governments to truly understand the benefits that flow to each country from that mutual trade. And together with our government, the Australian government, we've worked hard to lobby for a reaffirmation of that economic relationship and the importance of it.
China has launched a new satellite to enable communications from the far side of the moon. The Chuiqiao-2 will go into lunar orbit, allowing signals to be relayed from the moon's so-called dark side during current and future missions. Our correspondent Sun Ye reports.
The Queqiao-2 relay satellite was launched by the Long March 8 Y3 rocket from the Wenchang Satellite Launch Center on Wednesday morning. The satellite was sent into its predetermined Earth-Moon transfer orbit, and the launch was declared a complete success. The satellite that is tasked with setting a bridge of communication between the Earth and Moon has much lined up to do. It's considered especially important for missions that involve the far side of the Moon, where direct communication with the Earth is impossible.
发射成功只是第一步。
For Queqiao-2, the launch success is only the first step. The satellite will next need to carry out a series of important acts like in-orbit mid-course correction and braking at the payload. After it enters what is called its mission orbit, it will carry out communication tests with Chang'e 4 and Chang'e 6 to ensure that it can establish the Earth-Moon relay communication link and provide services for Chang'e 4, Chang'e 6, and subsequent missions.
China's Chang'e 4 probe became the world's first spacecraft to soft land it on the Moon's far side with the touchdown in 2019. And the Chang'e 6 mission is expected to launch within the first half of this year. After the Wednesday launch, in time, the Queqiao-2 satellite will carry out in-orbit communication tests with Chang'e 4 and ground-to-space communication tests with Chang'e 6 and determine whether the relay satellite is able to support Chang'e 6 sample retrieval mission from the far side of the Moon.
China's National Space Administration said the Queqiao-2 satellite is designed to be capable to provide relay communication not only for Chang'e 4, Chang'e 6, Chang'e 7, and Chang'e 8, but also future domestic and international lunar exploration missions. Sun Ye, CGTN, Wenchang Satellite Launch Center.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Saudi Arabia on his latest attempt to secure a truce in Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages. He'll also visit Cairo as ceasefire talks in Qatar enter a third day. But a stop in Israel has yet to be officially confirmed. It comes as the World Health Organization says a growing number of children in Gaza are on the brink of death due to hunger, with newborns dying because of low birth weight. Let's talk to our correspondent, Sarah Coates, who's in Tel Aviv. So Sarah, reports inside Israel suggesting that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be visiting. What can you tell us?
Hello there, Robin. That was just confirmed by senior officials a short while ago. He is expected to land in Israel on Friday after these visits to both Saudi Arabia and Egypt, where he's really pushing for a ceasefire, a hostage release, and more aid to get into the Gaza Strip. Now, when he's on the ground here in Israel, he's widely expected to discuss with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this expected operation into the southernmost area of Rafah, an area that the US has been warning Israel it should not go into, given that there are more than 1 million internally displaced Palestinians sheltering there, with still no plan as to where these people should go. We did hear from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night addressing lawmakers, saying that he is determined to carry out this operation down into Rafah, saying he made it supremely clear to US President Biden that this would happen. And this is despite Biden calling this delegation of Israelis to Washington early next week to discuss alternatives to this operation in Rafah, with just growing international concern over what could happen here. Now, it comes as the humanitarian situation on the ground is really worsening by the hour. The United Nations says people are facing catastrophic levels of hunger, while the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has just put out a tweet urging Israel to allow the head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, into the Strip. He has reportedly been blocked. Israel says he didn't follow the proper procedure, but Borrell says that he plays an indispensable role in bringing relief to people there. Robin.
And Sarah, we've been hearing more about those Israeli raids on Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. The Israeli army saying it eliminated
90 people there, but Hamas claims many of those were civilians.
Certainly, the Israeli Defense Forces has put out an operational update. This has now been ongoing since very early Monday morning. There were apparently, according to the IDF, 90 Hamas members killed. You mentioned that this has been said that that's not true by Hamas. In addition to this, some 300 people have been questioned. Also, 160 others. They have been rounded up and brought here to Israel for further questioning. We've seen pictures circulating on social media showing men in the back of trucks. They are blindfolded. They are wearing white suits. Still no word on their whereabouts. In addition to this, Robin, we do understand, according to a number of sources on the ground, that people, civilians that have been sheltering inside Al-Shifa Hospital, they've been interrogated for hours. They've been forced to strip their clothes off and then sent down into these southern areas of Rafah and other areas like this. Well, the Israeli military says that it has credible evidence that Hamas operatives are actually working inside Al-Shifa Hospital, but at this hour has not given any evidence that actually proves this claim. And just lastly, it's important to note that hospitals are actually protected under international law, but this becomes void if it is found that an enemy is actually using this medical facility to launch an attack. Robin.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Let's go to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent Noor Harazin, who is in Rafah. So, Noor, let's start with this warning from the World Health Organization about children dying from famine. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Robin, since the beginning of this Israeli offensive on the coastal enclave and in the first 2 weeks of this Israeli war on Gaza, the Israeli forces targeted the food infrastructure in the coastal enclave. I mean, the Israeli warplanes targeted the main bakeries in Gaza, mills, also attacked and besieged main farms close to the border between Gaza and Israel. This came along with a tightened Israeli blockade on the coastal enclave. It was until late November until Egypt allowed some aid into the Gaza Strip, and until this day. I mean, we are more than 5 months into this Israeli war on Gaza, and there is very little aid that is entering Gaza. We are talking only 10% of the needs of the people that is being allowed, and only 1% of that is being allowed to northern Gaza. The situation in northern Gaza is catastrophic. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 27 people died because of starvation in northern Gaza. Most of them are children, and now we are talking about dozens of other children. Their life are in danger. Their families are now seeking help through social media, showing photos, videos, calling upon the international community, calling upon Egypt to allow more aid into the Gaza Strip. And some of these children are actually suffering from other diseases like, for example, hepatitis or kidney failure, and they require specific items of food to survive. However, these items are not available in northern Gaza.
And Noor, there's been an Israeli attack on an aid distribution team in Gaza City.
Well, yes, actually the past 24 hours were very deadly. We are talking about hundreds of attacks, Israeli attacks on the coastal enclave, airstrikes in Rafah, airstrikes in Middle Gaza, airstrikes in northern Gaza. Of course, one of the highlights, the airstrike that targeted a group of a team that was working on the distribution of the aid close to the Al Kuwait square in northern Gaza. 24 people were killed. Most of them are actually elderly men, and here in Arabic we call them the Mukhtar of the family, and this means that the chosen man, the head of the family. Usually these people are chosen by the members of the family to serve and help the members of the family. So, and this is not the only Israeli attack on a distribution point. I mean, over the past 2 weeks, there have been several Israeli attacks on Palestinian and UN distribution points where dozens of people were killed. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 104 Palestinians were killed over the past 24 hours, and this brought up the death toll here in Gaza up to 31,923.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Rafah. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Thousands of people are evacuated from the Russia-Ukraine border region as bombs rain down on both sides.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Partners, not rivals. The message from China's foreign minister as he visits Australia on a visit aimed at stabilising trade ties. China launches a new satellite to enable communications from the dark side of the moon. And US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Saudi Arabia in a new push for a Gaza ceasefire and the release of hostages. Russia and Ukraine both say they've repelled air attacks near their border, with thousands of civilians forced to flee as bombs rained down on both sides. One person is reported to have been killed in Ukraine's Sumy region during what's been described as intense bombardment from Russia. President Zelensky said villages, cities and civilian infrastructure were targeted by what he called terrorist attacks. Russian officials said Ukraine-launched missiles and drones were shot down over Belgorod and Kursk. Russia says it plans to evacuate around 9,000 people from border areas in the coming days as the shelling continues. Let's talk to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova, who's in Moscow. Dasha, tell us about these evacuation plans.
Well, indeed, we have heard from the governor of Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the confirmation that after the intensification of the Ukrainian attacks against this border region of Russia, the decision has been made to relocate from this region 9,000 children. He said this is the number of the requests that the officials have received when this offer was put behind the parents. Already this week, 1,200 children will be taken to 3 other regions of Russia, deeper inside the Russian territory. This is the region of Penza, Tambov, as well as Kaluga. We understand that these children will be provided with everything necessary, and afterwards the remaining applications and requests for the relocation of children will be also met. We also have heard from the authorities there the confirmation just recently that 2 people died as a result of the Ukrainian shelling of the Graivoron district in the Belgorod region. Early in the day, another person died as a result of the Ukrainian attacks, and pretty much constantly every minute we receive the reports about the attacks against this region taking place, about missiles, about sirens in this area. We also have heard from the Russian president, who said that Belgorod residents are very courageous. He thanked them for this courage, and he said that everything will be done to support people who were forced to relocate or who have now to rebuild their houses. He did say that Moscow is seeing all of those Ukrainian attempts to attack the civilians, and Moscow will respond. Moscow has all the capacity to do so. Earlier this week, we've heard Putin saying that Moscow is willing to create the so-called buffer zone that will prevent those attacks from happening so that the Ukrainian fire cannot reach the Russian borders.
And Dasha, the Kremlin wants to now allow convicted criminals to join the Russian military. What does that tell us about the shortage of regular troops?
Well, indeed, we've heard the reports about both chambers of the Russian parliament. Now it is the Federation Council approving the package of legislations that do provide for the possibility of future or convicts on trial to actually sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. The idea is that the people who are under investigation, who are on trial, who have already been sentenced, will have the possibility to sign those contracts. Obviously, not everyone, not all felonies will be allowed to do so. We understand that those of particular seriousness will not be allowed, such as terrorism or extremism or sex crimes. They will not be provided with this opportunity. But for the time that the contract is active, the convicts will have an opportunity to have their cases suspended. And if they receive the state awards during the course of the operation in Ukraine, there is a possibility that their cases will be expunged. Obviously, it is not the first time we hear about this practice. It was spearheaded by the Wagner head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who started recruiting convicts, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has actually said himself earlier that he was signing on the pardons himself for the convicts who have participated in the operation in Ukraine. He also has talked about the recidivism, saying that the recidivism among those who have participated in the operation was mediocre, less than 1%.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva in Moscow. Let's go to Kyiv now and talk to our correspondent there, Megumi Lim. So, Megumi, what's been the reaction in Ukraine to this escalation of those attacks across the border?
That's right. The understanding here is that the aim is to put the Kremlin under pressure. Now, these attacks have been carried out ahead of Russia's presidential elections and during the elections. And now, after Russian President Vladimir Putin's big election win, these attacks have continued. Now, the aim is to try to pierce through this picture of stability that President Putin has been trying to portray and hold on to as the war has continued on with Ukraine. But at the same time, Ukrainian forces are also facing critical shortages of weapons and ammunition on the front lines, and as Russian forces continue to try to apply pressure on the 1,000-kilometer-long front lines, and as they have tried to advance, Ukrainian forces are also trying to apply pressure on the Kremlin by targeting and carrying out attacks against targets inside Russia. And the aim also is to try to divert some Russian resources away from the front lines so that they can have some time to replenish and resupply their troops. Now, over the past 2 weeks, we have seen specifically a stepping up of attacks by Ukrainian forces against the oil facilities in Russia over 9 different regions. We've seen reports that as many as a dozen oil facilities in Russia have been hit, and about 12% reportedly of Russia's oil refining capacity has been damaged. And we've seen in recent days Russia's Ministry of Energy, an official from Russia's Ministry of Energy, saying that they're now trying to prepare ways to defend these facilities with missile systems. And in the latest string of attacks that have been carried out by Ukrainian forces against these critical infrastructure and military targets, we've seen just one Reuters report today that the Engels air base in Russia's Saratov region was hit by Ukrainian drones. And according to Ukrainian intelligence, first of all, Engels Air Base is home to Russia's strategic fighter bomb fleet. And according to Ukraine's intelligence, they're saying that the damage they have inflicted a certain level of damage on this airbase, but according to the governor of Saratov, he's saying that indeed Ukrainian drones were downed over this region, but there's been no damage reported so far. And meanwhile, as Russia and Ukraine exchange attacks on each other's territories, we've also been seeing reports of evacuations taking place in Ukraine's northern Sumy region, which borders Russia. Authorities have said that attacks by Russian forces have increased significantly over the past few days, specifically the use of guided bombs against this region. And President Zelensky has accused Russia of, quote, waging a terrorist war against our people.
Nagumilim in Kyiv, thank you very much. The European Union has agreed new limits on duty-free Ukrainian grain after protests by farmers. Tariff-free imports were introduced after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the measures prompted roadblocks by farmers at border checkpoints in Poland and demonstrations in several EU countries. Despite the new cap, Brussels will extend tariff-free access for many Ukrainian food producers until 2025. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar has announced he's resigning as leader of the government and the Fine Gael party. It follows the coalition government's resounding defeat in twin referendums earlier this month. Varadkar became the youngest person to hold the office of Taoiseach when he was elected by party members in 2017. His surprise departure doesn't mean a general election has to be called, but a vote is expected to happen before the end of the year. An Irish parliamentary committee is expected to recommend that the government bring in legislation to allow assisted dying in certain circumstances. Adults diagnosed with an incurable disease or condition that's expected to end their lives within 6 months could be eligible. A 12-month residency rule is being recommended to discourage so-called suicide tourism. Cuba has accused the United States of causing public anger by spreading misinformation. Havana has lodged a complaint with Washington over the incident. It comes as protests were held in several cities over the weekend after days of power outages and food shortages. CGTN's Luis Chirino reports.
Demonstrators took to the streets in Cuba's second-largest city, Santiago de Cuba, around 800 kilometers east of Havana, and in 4 other communities, including Matanzas City. In Santiago and other places, protesters met with authorities who listened to their criticisms and explained government efforts to ease the current situation. No disruption of the civil order or arrests were reported. Cubans have endured power blackouts that have lasted 18 hours and in some cases for more than a day. Officials say the power disruptions were due to shortages of fuel to generate electricity and keep stocks of frozen food refrigerated. Amid the protests, some U.S. lawmakers posted messages on X criticizing the Cuban government. U.S. embassy officials also urged respect for human rights, which Cuba criticized as inappropriate. The Cuban Foreign Ministry summoned U.S. Charge d'Affaires Benjamin Sif to deliver a protest note over statements posted by U.S. officials that Cuba considered interference in the country's internal affairs and slanderous. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel also denounced what he called terrorists in the United States. He posted remarks on X saying they are enemies of the revolution, taking advantage of the situation to destabilize Cuba. Following Sunday's events, Cuba's top government authorities reiterated their commitment to listen to the people's demands and find solutions to, quote, improve the situation, always in an atmosphere of tranquility. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.